Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. Thank you so much for being here out on the road on the campaign trail as we are in week 2 of the BC election. Some exciting news just to start off with. If you'd like to meet your Political Capital panel in person, minus Jillian, unfortunately, who is a delight to meet in person, let me tell you, you can come to our debate night viewing party on October the 8th in Vancouver. Check our social media feeds for the free attendance info. We'd love to have you there. We're going to be doing some pre and post debate analysis. And Adam Olson, our special guest that night, filling in for Jillian. Jillian, we will miss you.
Trying to fill in for Jillian. Tall order.
We are going to talk about one of our topics today, the TV leaders debate, and what to expect and what to look for there as well. So we're going to get into that with the pod squad. Jillian, Jeff, and Allie are here. Thank you so much. Let's start with the first half of the debate question, which was the CKNW radio leaders debate, which occurred this week. How do we think it went? What were the ramifications of it? Who won? I don't know if you can win debates in this day and age. I guess that's a question that we might have. Let's start there. Jillian, why don't we start with you? What did you think of the debate? What was your kind of impressions of who came away in what position?
I sort of was looking at this debate as the dress rehearsal for the big one. So I think it was really, we kind of see the leaders sort of trying to feel each other out, trying to see where one another are going to go. I think that both David Eby and Sonia Furstenau came across quite well, sounding, reasonable, knowledgeable, and kind of, accomplished their main goals. Eby also had kind of the spiciest moment where he printed out a tweet of one of John Rustad's comments and handed it to him, which was, I think like the right amount of drama for the first kind of quieter debate. And it was interesting to see how Rustad handled that, which was by just ignoring it completely and pivoting to talk about other things. I think he had some good moments as well, especially was strong when he was talking on healthcare. But in many ways, I think that moment is sort of like encapsulates what we're going to see for the rest of the campaign. Is sort of like they're talking about the issues. Everybody kind of has their own points that they can land, and that part's kind of a wash. And then Eby kind of puts a trump card on Rustad, and he doesn't answer it. And I think that's kind of what they're hoping the ballot box question is going to be, that kind of creates enough doubt in people's minds, that when people go to vote, that's what they're thinking about. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of tweak their strategies going into the main televised debate next week, which is really the one for all the marbles.
Mm-hmm. We'll circle back and do what to look for in the TV debate next. Jeff, what did you think of the radio debate?
I thought it was interesting. I don't think there are typically winners and losers in debates. I think it's more about who succeeded in accomplishing what they needed to accomplish in the debate. And I think on that measure, Eby and Furstenau both did a better job succeeding than Rustad did. I don't think it was a catastrophic failure for Rustad. I think he had an opportunity, though, to address some of the questions people had about his party and the extreme views that they're taking on a number of issues, and set his campaign on a trajectory for some strong post-debate momentum, and he didn't get that done. I thought that Eby did he sounded good on the radio, which is important. I know it's a radio debate, but if you look at the dynamic between Eby and Rustad, one of them was a bit of an alpha male. Eby was like staring right through Rustad, and Rustad was like it's like he had fallen in love with Mike Smith. He was staring at him so much. And Mike's a good guy, so I think he's
dig yourself out of. Go ahead, Jeff. Dig yourself out of that hole.
What did John Morgan say about liking to stare at people? What did John Morgan say? That went well for him. as well. I thought Rustad was especially poor on his response to the question about his candidate's comments about COVID vaccine causing AIDS. A simple answer of no, I don't believe that would have been super helpful and would have put him on a stronger position. I thought he did a good job, though, Rustad. I thought he did a good job telling people stories. I think EB could have done a better job of telling people stories. And I think I'll be looking for him to do that a bit more in the televised leaders debate. And I will say that the debates are always a win for the Greens because it puts them in an equal position with the two main parties. And that isn't something that always happens in the day-to-day coverage in a polarized election. So it gives folks a chance to see Sonia Furstenau. And she's not everyone's cup of tea, but for many people, they find her the way she manages these debates and the way she performs in the debates as a refreshing and different and appealing. And so when she's able to do that, that's a win for the Greens.
Just before we bring you in, Allie, we're just going to, if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to put the camera back on Jillian because her cat, Bruce, is back there. And I'm just wondering if he's going to knock the flowers over,
I know.
But he's not.
I was scared he was going to eat them.
Yeah.
Bruce is like the average voter. He's just tuning in now to see what's happening in the election.
Yes,
so
exactly. There you go.
His ears are perking up and he's,
and the average voter eats flowers also. So, Allie, let's bring you in. What do you think of the debate? What jumped out at you?
This conversation is so interesting to me because, obviously I looked at and heard this debate and thought, oh, John Rustad's actually killing it right now. And it's the biasness that we all have kind of going into already picking our favorite party. So we are not the average voter at all when we're doing an analysis of this debate. That being said, I do have to say that I think John Rustad actually did really great. Here's why. When we talk about David, I think Jillian, you mentioned that there was some deflection on John's part, pardon me. But what I kept hearing was a good line from John Rustad, actually pointing to David Eby, saying that when he wasn't answering any questions, that it was a deflection based on weak leadership. And I think I heard this 3 or 4 times. We're likely going to hear it in the televised debate too, because essentially none of them really answered the question directly, and they were skirting around to make sure that they would they would get the key messages that they needed to. Just like most politicians, they kind of already have the script in mind, not really caring about what the question is, and because they need to get to that one point. And so I heard a lot of that. There was a lot of talking over each other, so I can only imagine that the next one's going to be a little bit more dramatic. I thought this was really good because one of the criticisms for John Rustad for months leading into the campaign were that where does he stand on certain things? And the Conservative Party has been putting out policy almost twice a day at this point, policy after policy every single day. And he made an effort to try to get as much of that out as possible. To what everyone's talking about, maybe didn't directly answer some of the things that David Eby wanted him to answer on the Chris Sankey stunt. But he did bring it back to the policy.
Valid question, important question. Come on.
It was a campaign stunt, which also it also brings me back to these debates are important because it's the undecided voter that they're going after. And in this campaign, we have a whack ton of undecided voters. And it's important because the parties put out consistently very, very catered ads to make them look a certain way. The debate is one of the only places where a very smart journalist or moderator will kind of cut through some of the political spin and try to get to the direct answer. And so that's important. I don't think that we necessarily have a lot of that opportunity in the radio debate, though, because of all of the talking over one another.
Jillian, the TV debate, it's a different dynamic because the cameras are and people are watching the body language. They're watching how the leaders look. Based on what we saw on the radio debate, what should we be looking for in the TV debate? If we continue to see the NDP do these sort of attacks on Rustad in the moment, does it translate on TV? Is there risk there? Is there benefit in sort of confronting him being? I thought David Eby was pretty direct and aggressive at certain moments. Asking Rustad to repeat, do you believe in this tweet? Do you believe in your candidates? How does that sort of translate on television when people are watching it, kind of good or bad, do you think?
Well, I think, the dynamic for each of them is very different. They have different things to accomplish. And I think Eby does have to walk a fine line between making sure he's not going on the attack too much at the expense of talking about his own plans and why he's still the better option. I think he did a pretty good job on that, but I think that's probably something that he's working on, striking that proper balance heading into the leaders debate. But, it is also a debate it's almost like a little battle, right? Like you are trying to throw the other person off. And I think, try to make them seem defensive or unhinged or whatever you think that they might be, that might kind of represent poorly to voters. And it's interesting to, these guys have been in the legislature together for a long time. So they know each other well and have seen each other in debate in the legislature quite a bit. So they're analyzing all of those things to see what they can do. We saw Kamala Harris do that really well with Donald Trump. Every time she was asked a question that was difficult for her on a difficult part of her record, that's when she tried to pick at his size of his rallies, those kinds of things. I think, the way that Eby did just kind of present one of those tweets shows that he kind of gets that it needs to be sort of like not the main event, but just a small tactic to kind of throw Rustad off and get him on the defense. And I actually think we did see a glimmer of that working, because right after the radio debate, they all went to the Vancouver Board of Trade and gave some speeches. Rustad was asked about this again, and he actually did give a more direct answer where he said, I accept and welcome different views in my party. And so I think that shows that, it kind of did push him off kilter a little bit. Jeff also pointed out the fact that he wasn't looking at the other leaders. So, it's a tactical battle, and it's going to be really interesting to see if they can shake each other in that way.
Mm. Jeff, is it like, first off, TV leaders debate, what do you think to look for there? But also that question of, if the first half of the campaign has been the NDP trying to define John Rustad as risky with all these examples, just example after example of wacko things that candidates have said, and sometimes that Rustad has said himself, and we've talked about them. If the polls aren't showing any kind of movement on that, do the NDP keep doing it? Do they keep going on the leaders debate and TV with another move like this? Do they continue down the path? Is there any pivot, or is that just still the best play for them, do you think?
I think it's three phases to the NDP campaign. I think the first part of the campaign was very much about defining John Rustad and halting any momentum that could come from the BC United, BC Conservative coming together. And so you saw an awful lot of focus on the Oppo stuff and creating a sense of risk in voters' minds that this person, this party, are not well suited to form government because of the things they've said and done in the past. I think that has largely succeeded. I think we've seen some momentum from the Conservatives, but you've certainly not seen 1 + 1 = 2, right, with the merger of BC United and BC Conservatives. I think, though, that in this TV debate, we're in phase 2 of the campaign, and I think there's a need, and I think we can expect Premier Eby to focus on less about the weird things that were said and more about, for British Columbians who are worried about healthcare and housing and affordability and public safety, here's where I will lead us, and here's what the risk is to you with a Rustad election. And I think that's actually more into the ballot question than any of the Oppo stuff will be. And then we'll see how that plays out in phase 3, and this will be all parties. It's mobilizing voters. And in a close election like this, where we haven't seen much movement in the polls, everyone is kind of between 42 and 45, where there's a bunch of seats in regions that are very close, where just a few seats will determine who may form government. We're going to move away from Oppo and policy, and it's just going to be on ramping up the organization in the ridings and getting as many people out that you can to vote. The one thing being that you got to watch the debate, see what happens after the debate, because the best get out the vote strategy is just campaign momentum and a sense of And so if someone comes out of that leaders debate having a great moment, putting the other person on their heels, and it's very rare that this happens, but it can happen. And then we're into the last phase of the campaign. Mm-hmm. This is not a dull election for the folks who are listening at home. Fun to watch.
Let's bring you in, Allie. The TV leaders debate, what should we be looking for there? And do the NDP continue based on sort of Jeff's phasing there of defining Rustad, or is that over?
Well, haven't they've been essentially trying to do this ever since John Rustad entered the scene? And I think it's to kind of respond to some of the things that Jeff has said. The David Eby portraying John Rustad as someone not ready to lead the province. And then John Rustad's position will be that we can't trust that David Eby will do the things that he's promised to say or to do because of all of the timing of his flip-flops, as we've talked in previous campaigns. And is he willing to stay key to his word? And then this sentiment of change, we've also talked a little bit about this. There are people that are upset because life is unaffordable, they can't find a family doctor, all of those things. There are people that are upset, but are they so upset that they are willing to put their vote and this chance on John Rustad? I think what John has to do in this debate is say, I am ready to take on this position, that I am someone that you can trust, because that change that you want can happen through my government. That's a lot easier said than done, though. When we talk about momentum, as Jeff said, this is, I'm on the ground, knocking on the doors, doing all of the things that any good campaigner should be doing. This is a fascinating concept where people are wanting this change, but they don't necessarily know either leader in David Eby or John Rustad or Sonia Furstenau. And then the other aspect of this is that on a campaign strategist perspective, NDP have historical data, right? The Conservatives do not. So there's a huge unidentified support base for the Conservatives that they don't even have in their system because they're a brand new party. And so that we kind of have to go on the momentum of change for it to match the polling.
It's going to make it hard for the Conservatives to get the vote out without that sort of data, which is critical on identifying your supporters and getting them out, as Jeff said, that phase 3 for every party. We have the platforms from the NDP and the Greens out this week. And in the case of the NDP, an immediate sort of following of the platform by the Conservatives putting out their call to get rid of paper straws and paper cutlery and return to plastic straws and plastic cutlery, because in their words, in this social media campaign they put out, paper straws suck, which was this big graphic. And I'm sort of wondering if more people saw the paper straws suck thing than they saw organically through their social media feeds and people sharing it than they saw the NDP platform. And if so, what that says about the electorate and the difference of what's happening here. I don't know, Jillian. The platforms and the kind of populism of the Conservatives on that. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely that was strategic. I think they probably had been holding that back for the NDP platform day, but I'm not sure. I don't know if the NDP minded too much because they didn't put anything too showy in their platform anyway. I think they don't want to get into a situation where people say, you're promising even more stuff. You've already promised so much stuff you haven't delivered on. Like, we don't believe you. I think Eby doesn't really have a choice but to run on his record. And we heard him say that in the leaders debate. We're just starting to see the results of some of my policies. And so I think, I don't know if it really had they really even needed to do that. And maybe it was kind of like a wasted effort. The NDP also did have another one that was quite telegenic, or I don't know what the word is for that with social media genic, with pets in rentals that I think resonated. And I did hear a lot of people talking about that, and obviously it makes for a great picture online.
Purpose-built rentals, but
yes.
not all the rentals.
Yeah, details are thin, but fuzzy, maybe we would say. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's interesting from our perspective to see these sort of tactics. Yeah, I think I don't know where the paper straw thing is going to land. I think the risk is that it kind of makes the Conservatives potentially seem a little bit unserious, and adds also into that, like, people are kind of used to not having those utensils. We got wood ones, the little sippy cups. Like, it kind of adds to that narrative of like they want to go backwards when we need to go forwards, and helps both the NDP and the Greens are kind of trying to make that argument about rest ads. So I think it's, no risk, no reward, and we'll kind of see where that lands.
Yeah. Jeff, just a minute to you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna point out. I think that the NDP platform, they really just honed in on here are the key campaign commitments that we've made around healthcare and housing and affordability, the tax cut, the building the hospitals, the attracting the doctors and nurses, the building the housing. But got to say a word about this Conservative straw thing. It is, it's just tremendous. They have solved such an existential problem that we have in British Columbia here. How can we possibly drink things without straws and without super effective straws? It's going to be big news for folks who have not mastered the technology of the cup. So for babies in particular, and John Rustad.
If we could get the babies to vote. Just imagine what would happen.
But sippy cups.
Yeah, a lot of spoiled ballots. Let's say that. Allie, over to you.
Paper straws do suck. And you know what? Good on the Conservatives for launching this on the same day that the NDP platform came out. And then I'm hearing more about the plastic straw announcement than the various intricacies of the platform. So it goes to show that there wasn't actually anything in there that was as popular and as going into Thanksgiving weekend. Like, what are we going to be talking about? At my table, we're going to talk about how this is a great moment for plastic straws.
Are you going to use plastic cutlery at your Thanksgiving table?
I'm
dolphins.
going to.
They're dolphins.
I'm going
dolphins
to.
Dolphins are crying because of this.
Oh yeah, I thought the NDP platform reminded me of a throne speech, where it was like a table of contents, and the party used the next day to announce some of the details on the speculation tax, for example. So they're holding off on certain things to do announcements with real people at real locations, which is was kind of my takeaway of the platform. But anyways, we're out of time for the TV version of the show. Thank you so much to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our audio podcast for a lot more additional content about the election this week. We'll be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.